A very big welcome to Aparna Rao for this conversation with Open-Ended. As a reminder, Open-Ended is a platform for activist designers and thinkers from around the world. Together, we will explore the spaces where creativity, culture, and design come together with tech, science, and engineering, with a lens on challenging existing structures and perspectives. We welcome all of you to join in as we bring a global, diverse community of creators together through this initiative for design thinking and change. So our guest today, Aparna Rao, is an old friend of mine and somebody who I've always respected and admired. I think I was introduced to her when I was still in California working for Google. And we have mutual friends who were with her as some of the very first speakers on the TED circuit, which is, a very elite group of individuals from culture, design, tech from around the world. But I will also share with you her official work story. Over the years, I've followed along to see her evolve as an artist and grow and also be incredibly successful, but also somebody who has always been questioning of what comes next and how to move forward every step of the way. So Aparna is part of the Indo-Danish art duo Pors Rao, who you will have heard of. So you may have heard of her as part of Pors Rao. She's based in Bangalore in India. And she and her collaborator, Søren Pors, work with objects and installations, often incorporating lifelike physical movement and responsive behaviors. So lots of robotics in her work as an artist. After toiling, which is her word, with computer simulations, the internet, and gameplay in the early 2000s, they both abandoned the screen to work with objects that engage the body. Many of their works are conceived as a kind of being with basic behavior patterns such as shyness, fatigue, dependence, highlighting what is the involuntary aspect of human behavior and relationships. Some of her works, or their works, imply a kind of preconceptual way of perceiving the world, where the things around us are imbued with emotion and thought, as if everything was conscious. And you will not see an artwork of hers without stopping to think and question. I can guarantee that. So she has exhibited around the world. Setouchie Triennale is one of my favorites, but also at the Kochi Biennale. She's been at museums across the world, so I'm not going to list it, from Korea to Switzerland, Spain, Norway, and Japan. And they describe their work as one of research. They're a research-based practice, and they're looking to develop their own language and physical animation. They're actually doing that right now. And now, Pors and Rao are actually artists in residence at ETH in Zurich, where they moved as a duo in March 2017. And we're going to talk a little bit about that going forward. So Aparna will talk about the aim of the lab, why it exists, how it came about, and more. But welcome, Aparna, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Suhair, for calling me. It's really nice to have a professional conversation with you after having so many discussions and exchanges over the years. So yeah, very, very happy to be on this platform as well.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about your work. We're going to talk about what you're doing now, your dreams for the future. But of course, I want to start with a little bit of your journey, who you are. You grew up in India, and then how, sort of your first few projects as an artist. So can you tell me a little bit about, how you decided to be an artist, the beginnings of it?
Yeah, well, maybe as a child, it was the first thing that occurred to me that I want to be an artist. And I was always drawing and doing my own things. And I'm the only child in quite a large family. And so I always had my own world, kind of. I really didn't mingle with other kids or adults. And I was mostly with animals and had a lot of pets and rescued creatures. And so I was always drawing and making things with my hands. And my father also, and my uncle, they had a furniture factory. So growing up around making things and building things and hand craftsmanship was second nature to me. So I always thought I'm going to be an artist. But as I was growing up, I thought I wasn't a good enough artist because I felt like my drawing and sketching skills were not as good as I'd have liked them to be. And I got a lot of attention from the family for being good at drawing, and I didn't like this. And so I abandoned it after some time, and I thought, oh, I can do design because I may have a brain sense of structure and aesthetics that was most suited for design. So I was for a year at Setouchie Design School in Bangalore, and then went to do an undergraduation at the National Institute of Design, and I did graphic design. And I think during that time, it was quite a difficult period because I was pretty much, really, that was the dream. I wanted to be a graphic designer. And so I went to NIT in 97, and it was still just pre-internet, or just the starting, internet had just begun to come into our world. And so graphic design was still very fundamental. It was still very much drawing with your hands. We didn't have personal computers at that time. There were no mobile phones. And so it was very old school. So it was still understanding form and structure and black and white, and designing logos and the MMs and microns, and how form and negative space work, and how geometry works and that sort of thing. And these 5 years just went by, and suddenly 5 years later, the internet had proliferated, and this whole discipline of graphic design had completely shifted to screen, and it just felt like I had been educated in a past era, and I felt completely kind of unprepared for this world, and I started to feel very depressed that I couldn't deal with this new way of thinking about design. And also I felt I wasn't a good graphic designer in the end, because I was always questioning myself and always wondering, why is this better? And it just felt a bit random to me. And now in retrospect, when I look back, I think I didn't understand it then, but I think I was searching for a personal language. Like, how is my graphic design different, or how can it be unique from somebody else's graphic design that might also be very visually stunning and exciting, but what's me in this design? And that question was haunting me, and everything else seemed so random, even if it was good. And so I left NIT I would say, not in a very good state of mind, feeling I'd learned nothing and I completely wasted my time. But of course, now I really value the time that I had there to question so many things, and just kind of nurture this heaviness in a way. And so at the end, in the final year in NIT, they have this quite nice system that you graduate only after you work for 6 months in the industry, and the industry certifies you to be of a certain standard and that you've made a strong contribution. So I chose a very complicated project. By the time you've reached your fifth year, everyone really wants to leave, and so did I. Just wanted to get out of there and get on with my life. But I just felt like I just needed to deal with a situation that was so urgent, and my feeling of being so disoriented and lost and not knowing what to do with my life, and feeling so incompetent and complacent and all of these things. So I thought I needed a shock therapy. And so I administered one to myself, which was that there was a project that had come to the Institute, and it was from the Defense Ministry, and it was to design the first synthetic simulator, online virtual simulator of a light combat aircraft. And there wasn't a discipline like that. There wasn't disciplines like interaction design interface back then. And so there was no student who took it, because we had furniture design, product, industrial, graphic design, film, and so it kind of fell in between everything. And I felt, okay, this is my chance to find to figure out a new medium. And it was also in my hometown, so I could come back from Ahmedabad to Bangalore. I was quite homesick then. And so it was really a very vigorous process of about 6 or 7 months. It was a quite difficult and, to me, quite hostile environment. It was very male-dominated, a lot of middle-aged and older scientists. And then when they looked at me, it was just like, oh my gosh, who's this freak? She's like quite young, 20 years old at that time. And what
23.
Yeah. And what is she going to do with this? And I didn't have any skills. I knew nothing about software. I just maybe handled a computer a few years and some email and Photoshop and that sort of thing.
And how did they give it to you? How did they agree for you to do it?
Because it's a government institution, it's part of their mandate to first check with another government institution, and NIT, the National Institute of Design, is partially funded by the government. And so it happened to come. It happened to come that way, and so then when I took it, they had to let me do it, and so it was. I think it was the best and the worst experience I've ever had, because it really was. I was just on a different planet inside this world, and I really, really wanted to crack it. And the environment was extremely tough and sometimes, honestly, quite degrading as a woman and a young student. And when I came out of that environment, I pretended like I was a normal 23-year-old, but inside there was just like a pressure cooker. And
did you have other people to work with? So when you're saying you needed to figure out how to bring these pieces together, how did you, as again a really young woman, understand the ecosystem and bring the right pieces together?
Well, I wasn't actually particularly gender conscious at that time, and I also grew up in an environment where I had a lot of my father, my uncles. We all lived together, and it was those who worked and those who kind of stayed at home. It wasn't so much like male, female. And I grew up mostly around men, so I'm very comfortable and often don't notice if I'm the only woman in the room. So it wasn't, I didn't have this gender consciousness in my head, but I did have this, like, they don't get me, they don't get this world, and they just thought there was just, I could sense some strange tensions, but I was just really focused because I thought I have to survive this or my life is over, like my life will be completely ruined. And somehow at the end, I did manage to pull it off, which I think was a real miracle. So there were a lot of people coding colors, like if you wanted to a color red or to make something move, it had to actually be coded. So I was like introduced to this whole world of code, and like very limited constraints, or to be low cost, it had to be low on code, and then every pixel was quite expensive. So the way you had to think about animation was highly optimized and expressive, and the whole idea was to give pilots orientation of the spatial location of all the switches and controls, because you can't have a loaded captive aircraft. It's just way too expensive, and pilots need to be trained way before they get onto the aircraft. So it's a virtual environment, but it again had to do with the body, which I found really interesting, and to be able to have a spatial orientation of controls and in split seconds know how to move your fingers and the sequences of things. And I had to kind of create a system that could train them to do that. So it was very interesting because I was naturally inclined to think about the body at that time.
And then what was your scholarship that you got after that?
Well, the great thing was that they were pretty taken aback that I managed to pull it off. And there was a lot of doubt and skepticism at the beginning and all through the few months. And I was so scared that I was doing a bad job that I didn't reveal the results of my project until the last day. And so it was actually quite a dramatic shift in perception, because they just thought I'm some useless kid hanging around and doing something for the sake of it. And then finally, it was really quite nice, and I had it in my document of the project. And they said, "Oh my gosh, I wish, or only wish you had done 1/10 of this." And I said, "No, I've done all of this and more." And so then they were like, "Where is it?" And I was just actually super scared to show them, thinking that they wouldn't approve. And then they really loved it. And then it was in the Aero Expo, and it went really well, yeah. So it was very scary, grueling, and very, I think, tempering life experience for me. And I felt very confident about, not confident, I felt like, okay, I can do this, I can learn something new, I can teach myself something. I can do something with the experience I've had, and it was very, very, very useful, of course. And so,
but this is still, you're still very much in the world of design. So this is, you've done really well. You've pushed yourself outside of, you know, this idea that you weren't in the right space. You've engaged now with technology and the internet. What took you out of that into the world of art, or seeing yourself as an artist?
Yeah, so the thing is that I had like two kind of ticks of feelings, and one was that I was not equipped to deal with the new medium of this world, which I knew was really rapidly coming into our life, and I didn't know how to respond to that. So that was one thing, and that kind of got a little bit settled with this project. And the second thing was, I just felt I hadn't found my groove. This thing that I was searching for, I didn't know what it was, but I knew that there was something missing in my life, and it was like this constant churn. It was a constant kind of heartache. That's all I can call it. And then, so when I did this project, and and nothing really appealed to me. A friend of mine said, "Oh, you must have heard of this place called Evrea. It's the best place that you can."
Called what?
It was called Evrea. It was called the Interaction Design Institute Evrea, and it was a master's course, and it was only set up for 4 years, so very elite.
And where was it?
It was in Italy.
Mm.
And it was, yeah, you needed 4 years of work experience. You needed to be quite well known and established already in your field somehow. And so then I just took it up on a whim because my friend just kind of quite disdainfully said, if you want to take this further, the only place that you should be is Ivrea. And then, very disdainful. So I just said, okay, I'm going to go check it out. And I couldn't even find the website for a very long time because I was spelling it wrong. I'm really bad at spelling. And finally, I got it, and it was the day before the final deadline, and I applied. And somehow I got in, and I think it was because the success of this project was such a dramatic event in my life, and the outcome was also very dramatic. And so it was an exception and took me directly from my undergraduation without any work experience. So I remember when I was so scared. I hadn't actually, I'd been abroad. I'd left India only once in my life with my parents a few years before. And so going to Italy.
And how old were you?
I was 24. I just turned 24. And yeah, just going away to this place on my own and not knowing how to travel and all of that was quite scary. But then I got there, and then I remember two things happened. I got there and I was like by far the youngest person. And there's a big age difference between 28 and 24 when you're 24. Mm-hmm. And so when I got there, I remember I went to the dean to collect my keys. They really took good care of us, and I got a big scholarship. So I was staying in a really nice heritage building and all of that. And so the dean said to me, there's a Dane that's just arrived and he's lost all his baggage. Please take care of him. And I was like, oh my gosh, how can I take care of a Dane? Like, I'm the one who's new to this world. And it actually turned out to be so true because the Dane was Søren. And
that's insane.
Yeah. And I remember that the first evening, that same evening, actually, we had a orientation of all the students. I think there were only 23 in the whole master's program. There's only one master's program. So there were only 50 students in this institute. And so we were walking back from dinner. I said, okay, who is this Dane who's lost his bags? Let me go find him. And I found him. And then he looked at me and said, why did you come here all the way from India? Like, why did you come to Italy? You could have gone to so many other places. And I just remember I was still really scared that I've arrived here and I know nobody and I'm just this anonymous person with no past and no one knows who I am. And I said, yeah, because I have this pain in my stomach. And then I said, like, why did you come? And then he said, because I have that same pain. Mm. And so I think it's just that I didn't know how to express it. And but I think what happened and what I found out was the first time I made something of my own, and I think Søren was a huge catalyst in helping me to get onto that process of creating your own content. And that was the uncle phone, and it was inspired by my uncle, the same uncle that ran the furniture factory with my father. And so we were very close. And
so the famous uncle phone, basically. Yeah. That started it all. Okay, so this was in Ivrea. You started working on the uncle phone.
Yes, it was just at the end of the first year, there was this project, and it was actually, it was instigated by, I think, a mobile company. They wanted us to think about mobile applications. And so it was to think about how telephones were used in your home. And when I left, it was the pre-mobile era. How telephones were used in your home, and to think about an app that would be exciting for that context or would be valid in that context. And so I was thinking, when I thought about the telephone, the use of the telephone, the thing that came to my mind was my uncle's use of it and how I got super mystified and sometimes also a bit frustrated. Like, for years, he would often hold on to the receiver and then say, can you dial so and so? And I have to remember the number and dial the number for him and wait till somebody answers the phone. And so this was just a practice we were all used to, and often I felt like it was so disruptive, like I was in my own world and suddenly I'd have to just come to dial a number, turn on a light switch or something. And so I thought, why not address the situation? But how do I address it with a mobile app? And I said, forget about the mobile app. And then I just said, what's going on? Why does this happen? And I'm super close to my uncle, but I still can't go and say, hey, listen, you can't ask me to dial a number for you. It's very absurd in the Indian context. And he wouldn't understand, yeah, why can't you dial a number? Like, you can't even say it. Like, there's all this kind of, even if you're close, there are all these layers of respect and hierarchy and all of that. And so then I just decided to kind of examine that situation. And so I made him a very long phone. It's 2 meters long because that was the minimum distance that he needed to have two people use a device that's made for one person. And so I made it, and it was so absurd, but I felt so deeply satisfied. I felt like, oh my gosh, like I've captured something. I felt like so deeply satisfied, I can't tell you. And so it was something about that phone that expressed firstly my affection for my uncle. It does look like a very affectionate object, but secondly, it also kind of, it had this element of distance that I craved, and it also kind of zoomed into this quite really tiny situation and kind of put such a big lens on it and kind of extrapolated the situation in a way that I couldn't express with words or in any other way. And so I gifted it to my uncle, and somehow I felt like it was just this huge big weight off me, because if it happens for years, you feel like your body kind of belongs to somebody else, because they're like, now get up, give me, turn on the switch, give me the newspaper. So it's like my body's an extension of his. And so it was all this like questions of control and feeling hostage and these constant disruptions and mind space. And so it was really weighing on my mind how to express it. And so
what a powerful thing, but it does make me think about the phone today. The mobile phone is an extension pretty much of my arm. And so it's attached to me, it's mine, but now I can't get rid of it. And that's a really interesting dialect.
Yes. This is Marshall McLuhan and all these people were talking about as technology being an extension of our own bodies or minds, or
Interesting. Okay, so and this wasn't with Søren. You built the phone without him.
Yeah,
or was he part of it?
It was my project, but I would say that we were already working alongside, and he was building the Nissa TV, which we also exhibited as and built as Pors Rao. And we were very lucky to get a commission from the All Arts Initiative. It's a big foundation in the Netherlands, and they follow the work and collect the work of John Tangley, among other artists. And they wanted to commission 6 or 7 contemporary work that somehow spoke to the practice of Tangley. And so we were very lucky.
And can you describe his practice a little bit?
Yeah, so Tangley worked a lot with reusable materials, and he saw anything as a medium of expression. And so he would use mud or discarded materials or trash, and he made all these beautiful sound machines and machines that performed. So there was a performative aspect of his work. There was also a creative aspect. He was one of the, I think, among the earliest people of this idea that machines could make art, and they were called metamatic machines.
Metamatic.
Yes, metamatic machines. And so he had machines that would move, and you would attach pencils to them, and they would make drawings, and they would make sound, and they would move. And they're quite beautiful and quite gigantic, and they were all quite physical, very sculptural, and many.
And when was that?
I think this was in the 50s. And so the project that we got was, I think, around 2008 or 9. And the very nice thing for us that the coincidence at that time was that Søren had also been toiling with this project, which I thought was very exciting, but somehow he was struggling to kind of realize it because he had so many ideas and didn't know where to commit. And it was the idea also looking at this involuntary aspect of the brain, of how audio and visuals, how image and sound in the brain involuntarily makes meaning out of them. So if I were clapping my hand, but you heard a church bell ring, your brain would automatically make an association of some kind. Or if you were opening a door, if there was you could add this feeling of suspense or of agitation or a child or a romantic scene just by the music or the way the door is opened. So he was looking into this. He was very excited about how image and sound can make meaning even without you intending to. And so he was looking at live TV feed. And so what we ended up making was this invisible box. And it was technologically very, very complex, and we bitten off a lot more than we could chew. But what it did was it analyzed live TV feed. It divided it into audio and visual channels. It had